Okay, Alexander, let's do an update with what is going on in Ukraine. We had martial law announced after a Security Council meeting earlier this week. We had a consultation group that was set up to overlook this coordination and consultation group to overlook the war. It's actually being led by the Vice President,
Yeah.
BITCHUTE, correct?
Yes, but Prime Minister, in fact, BITCHUTE, absolutely correct.
Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
The Prime Minister.
Yes.
He's leading that group, and he's a very good technocrat, actually. Very, very good. And we got the war. We got Bakhmut. We got the Kherson offensive, which Ukraine continues to try to break through, but they get repelled every time. But from what I understand, the real big push may happen next week. The collective West NATO, they're really pushing Ukraine hard to move into Kherson, really pushing them hard to do something in Kherson. And there are rumors, talk about the blowing up of the Kakhovka Dam. And that's going to be the event that may launch this big offensive by Ukraine.
That's
so
that's
is
right.
that everything?
No, well, I think it is
got
everything. But
everything,
you know,
yeah.
I mean, let's just take these things through. As you correctly said, Ukraine is constantly hammering away at Kherson. Every one of its attacks gets thrown back. Heavy losses. They made another attack on Wednesday. It went hideously wrong. But as you correctly say, the pressure on them to launch this offensive and to take Kherson, which is coming overwhelmingly now. It's clear from the West. I suspect, and just as you suspect, it's going to, you know, they're going to go on trying this thing until they either succeed or they totally fail. Now, you know, I, like you, think that the big push is probably going to come next week, and you know, we can only wait and see what they succeed, what they achieve with that. What I will say is that over the last few days, we've been getting more and more reports that the Russians are going to dig in Kherson, that they're building fortifications, that they're moving in more troops, that they're building in artillery, that they're turning Kherson itself, the city, into a kind of fortress. And it's clear that the Russians, for the moment, are prepared to make a big fight of it. And the Russians say that the Ukrainians are trying to blow up the dam. The Ukrainians and the Western media are saying the Russians are intending to blow up the dam. I can't understand why the Russians would want to blow up the dam, by the way. I mean, that doesn't make any kind of sense to me. But it's clear that something is, you know, there's a lot of talk, a lot of things are being prepared, all kinds of things are going on there. But that's a military event. That's next week. We'll have to wait and see how it evolves. The really big news this week, the key event this week for me, was that meeting of Russia's Security Council on Wednesday. And obviously, there was announcements of martial law in these four regions, which simply puts with the martial law that had already existed in these four regions before they joined Russia. It streamlines it with Russian regulations. But far and away, the biggest and most important thing, the thing that really points to what's coming, is the creation of this coordinating council headed by the Prime Minister. Now, this is a very powerful institution indeed. It has parallels with similar councils which were set up by Russian governments during previous wars. Something very like this was created during the Second World War, by the way. And its purpose is to mobilize the civilian economy to support the military in the war. So that this council, which, as you rightly said, is headed by the Prime Minister, the Defence Ministry, the military, in other words, the internal security agencies, the foreign intelligence service, they're all going to be represented on it. So are the economic agencies of the Russian government as well, the government's economic bloc, as it's called. And you can see what it's there to do. So, just to give an example, if the military needs more pontoon bridges to cross the Dnieper River, they can just, the council can then just order a factory to produce these pontoon bridges within a set period of time at a set price, get the pontoon bridges built, provided to the military in very swift time, and the factory that's ordered to do this has to do this within a certain period of time. So in effect, it complements the mobilization, the partial mobilization we've seen. It complements the decision to appoint a single commander, Surovikin, who's now in charge of all of these forces. It complements all the other things that we see the Russians now starting to do. And you can see that they're preparing now. They're now working towards a big war. It's no longer a case of the special military operation. They're still sticking with that title, a little to my surprise, but clearly now everything is working towards a big war. All the institutions of the Russian state are working to that end, and the apparatus is being created to wage it. So the single commander, the coordination council, the declarations of martial law, all of these point in that same direction. And of course, the missile strikes, the drone attacks, all of that points in that same direction as well.
So I wonder if Russia is working towards a big war in order to quickly defeat Ukraine, or in understanding that as they work to defeat Ukraine, NATO is going to jump in.
I have absolutely no doubt that it's both. And on the one hand, they're building up forces now on such a scale, and not just, as I said, in terms of the numbers of troops that they're deploying, but the economic resources, the industrial, technological, scientific resources, that so that they can crank out even more missiles, crank out even more tanks, do all of those things. The kind of forces needed to overwhelm Ukraine itself, but also in case a Western intervention happens, which I think the Russians, at the back of their minds, think is a real possibility, to be able to counter that too. In other words, it's no longer just a special military operation intended to achieve a political settlement. It is, in effect, a war pursued until total victory.
So there's a lot of talk in the United States that after the midterms, the Republicans, should they win control of the House, which I think is pretty certain now that they will get the House and maybe even the Senate. Actually, there's a pretty good chance they're going to get the Senate as well. But if the Republicans do very well, they are not going to give Biden this blank check to just send tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine. That's what the Republicans say. That's what McCarthy, to be more specific, has said. This is freaking out the neoliberal warmongers. It's freaking out the neocon warmongers. It's freaking out the Zelensky regime. What are the chances that McCarthy is good on his word? I don't think the chances are good. But what if McCarthy it sticks? Yeah, let's say he sticks to his word and he decides to cut Ukraine off. He says, you know what, we won on an America First type of platform, and so we're not going to send 10 billion to Ukraine. We're going to spend 10 billion at home, which is the right thing to do. 10 billion for your people, not to send over there. But let's say McCarthy keeps his word. Is Russia perhaps undergoing this war footing with the understanding that they're going to need everything they have to administer Ukraine, because Ukraine would collapse next day? I mean, it would be chaos, but it would collapse like immediately.
Yes.
if the U.S. pulled out
Yeah.
their funding, it would be over. Like a house of cards, it would be completely done next
Absolutely.
day,
Absolutely.
overnight. So
Absolutely.
is Russia perhaps doing this in understanding that in order to avoid a chaotic collapse, they're going to need everything they have to focus on Ukraine?
I think
Is that a
I think they
possibility?
do, and I think that is certainly one of the purposes of the Coordination Council. If you can see, if you look through the decree that the Kremlin has published, setting it up, it clearly envisages that it's going to supervise economic reconstruction, the administration of regions. It's that kind of immensely powerful body that is partly intended for that precise purpose. But I have to make an observation about this. Firstly, McCarthy has said that. I don't think it's going to be easy for McCarthy personally to go back on this. I think that he may have all kinds of feelings, but I think the Republican base is fairly clear about what it wants. I think that the Republicans in the House, a lot of them, who would be elected on this platform, they wouldn't want to give Biden any help at all. So I personally think that the Republican position would stick. But already you are seeing Democrats in Congress now joining up with rhinos. Sorry to use that expression, but you know who I'm talking about. The Marco Rubios, the Lindsey Grahams, the Mitch McConnells, all that crowd. And they're already talking about rushing through, before the new Congress meets in January, another $50 billion package for Ukraine, which would supposedly get Ukraine through 2023. So you see what they're trying to do. They're trying to rush it through before the new Congress is elected. Now, I don't think $50 billion is going to be enough to get Ukraine through 2023. I think I've seen an estimate that it would all run out by April at the rate that Ukraine is spending money at the moment. And I think that's probably about right. But even if we did get through 2023, what happens then? And in practice, if further funding was stopped, they said $50 billion, but you're not getting any more because Congress won't authorize any more, then I think the demoralization in Ukraine would be so profound that I think at that point it probably would collapse like a house of cards. But the point is that, they haven't given up. They're going to try hammering away, and you can't assume this is going to be over in that simple way. And of course, there are ways round it. If you can't get Congress to authorize money, you might use the president's position as commander-in-chief to start doing something with US troops, perhaps, trying to sort of insert them into Ukraine. I don't know, but those possibilities are also there. This is a very high-stakes game, and I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but we can already see that the Russians are making their moves. There's increasing doubts in the US, and it's not decided, and it's not over.
Yeah, but we haven't factored in winter and the collapse of the EU as well. So, I mean, is the US ready to take care of not only Ukraine, but the European Union is going to it's going to be dependent on the United States going forward. I mean, I wonder if Americans have realized that they're now on the hook for the European Union. I mean, it's theirs now. They're the ones that are going to flip the bill for the EU.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, which is going to be huge. I mean, it's going to be enormous. I mean, given that Qatar is refusing apparently to sell LNG to Europe, given that Nigeria is apparently refusing to sell LNG to Europe, given that all of these problems are now building up all over the place, it's all very well saying, that in European industry is going to migrate to the US and that the US will be economically strengthened. But it comes back to what we said many times. Does the US really want a whole series of broken countries as its allies, given that it has to bail out those countries and keep them running in some level if they're going to be useful as allies at all, instead of being just a burden on the US? So, I don't know to what extent all this is being thought through in the US. But I do get the sense that more and more people in the US, not just Republicans, by the way, are becoming sick and tired of this business. That the skepticism is growing. We saw, AOC being heckled by anti-war protesters, left-wing anti-war protesters. We never see those in Europe anymore, but they do seem apparently to still exist in the US. So I think there is a sea change in the US, but the Russians, from their part, obviously are not going to rely on that or depend on that. They are, as I say, preparing for a big war. They're assuming, I take it that they are assuming that US support for Ukraine is going to continue, and they're making sure that the forces that they're going to deploy to Ukraine, the size of the big armies, the industrial machines, the tanks, the aircraft, the logistics, are going to be more than sufficient to deal with whatever problem they may find in Ukraine from this point on. So the real war, I think you said this in a recent program, the real war is about to start.
No, I said the war between Russia and Ukraine ended in March.
Yeah.
They had a peace deal that didn't go through. After that, it's been Russia versus the collective West versus NATO since then. Real quick, the European Union, I'm getting reports here that the European Union, they can't agree on more sanctions against Russia. They can't agree on the oil and gas cap and all that stuff. They're having pushback from Belgium with regards to sanctioning diamonds. They're having pushback from France with regards to sanctioning nuclear fuel. And even Greece is giving pushback with regards to more sanctioning of the transport of Russian oil. Olaf Scholz said that they're going to give it another go next week to try and agree to something. What is the EU even trying to do at this point in time? I mean, what's the purpose of trying to figure out these sanctions? Does it really move the needle one bit with regards to punishing Russia?
No, it doesn't.
What's the point of this exercise going forward?
I have completely lost any understanding of what the EU is trying to do. I mean, back in February, when they announced all those sanctions, I mean, I did understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to destroy the Russian economy. The French finance minister actually went on radio in France and said that. That clearly hasn't happened. It clearly isn't going to happen. And they can't reverse course. They don't want to change course. Every time anybody comes up and says, let's change course, they're immediately slapped down. So Berlusconi made a speech to his own MPs, by the way, a private speech, but somebody recorded it. He set out a potted but accurate history of the Minsk agreements. So he's immediately published. He's criticised by Meloni, the Italian media. They all gang up on him. His party has to pull back. So, even the smallest dissent onto this policy in Europe comes in for vitriolic criticism and abuse. So they carry on with all these decisions. They go through the motions of more sanctions, which nobody, I think, any longer really believes in. They can't really agree on those sanctions because, as you said, everybody's now so affected by them. They're talking about price caps on gas, not just Russian gas, everybody's gas, which, of course, explains why Qatar and Nigeria aren't selling them gas. Because why should they sell gas to a market where the price of gas is capped? I mean, the gas will go to where the price is highest. Again, it's obvious. So, but they're doing all of this. They have no plan. They have no policy. The plan they had in February has gone up in smoke. They have no other, but they can't change course. So we are going downhill fast, and we've just done a program on Britain, and we've talked about how the situation here is going down fast because nobody in Britain, nobody in Europe wants to address the real reasons for all these problems.
The sanctions.
The sanctions, the economic war. I mean, they're more than just sanctions. They're an outright economic war, which we waged. We said to ourselves, this is a country masquerading as a gas station masquerading as a country. This is a house of cards. All we need to do is blow, give it a puff, and the whole thing will fall down. And of course it hasn't. And we're running out of oxygen. We can't go on blowing. And at the same time, we can't stop blowing either. So we are asphyxiating ourselves. And that's what we're doing. But nobody of influence is prepared to come out and say, this has failed, we've got to change course.
Only Orban.
Only
He's
Orban,
getting demonized for it.
Well, indeed. In fact, he actually came out and he said, he asked the European institutions, he said, look, he addressed the European Commission. He says, look, tell me, please, where you expect me to get my gas, the gas for my people from. Where? And of course, no answer. But the very fact that he's asking questions like that must mean that he's an agent of Putin. That's the narrative that you get instead.
Right. Where am I going to get the gas from? Where am I going to get the oil from? Where am I going to get the food from? Oh, you must be an agent of Putin. You know, right? I mean, he's asking actually the $1 million question, which is the question that every EU leader, if you can call them that, that's what they should be asking. Okay, you want to sanction Russia, you want to put caps on gas and oil. Tell me, where am I going to get these commodities from then? What's my option? Because Orban is very clever when he says that, and I want to end it on this point. I want your thoughts on this. He's very clever when he says that because the EU put themselves in a position during the start of the special military operation. They put themselves in the position of deciding everything with regards to European territory. That is how Ursula von der Crazy phrased it when she decided to close airspace, when she decided to cut off the media channels. She said, on European territory, we're not going to have any Russian planes. No one was asked about it. The countries weren't consulted. She made the decision. She's in charge of European territory. So Orban is very smart by saying, okay, Miss Queen Ursula, you're telling me that as Hungary, I'm not allowed to get oil or gas from Russia. Okay. Where am I going to get it from?
Yeah. Well, she has no answer.
What's the
to
answer?
That. Well, she has no answer to it, but she doesn't give an answer. As you said, she calls him Putin's agent. And of course, she's not the only person who's doing this. I think I mentioned in some...
So should Hungarians freeze?
Well, you see, this is where magical thinking starts to take hold, because, of course, she won't acknowledge the fact that Hungarians are going to freeze if they follow what her dictates are. A couple of videos ago, I mentioned the fact that I'd had a report, an email, a private email from someone in Germany, which I've since verified, by the way, that whenever anybody comes along and tells Robert Habeck, you know, one of his officials comes along and tells him these things, this is in Germany. He's the vice-chancellor, he's the economics minister. We can't get gas, we can't get oil. Gas from the US is too expensive. Gas isn't coming from Qatar. Oil, we're having now to buy it from China through, you know, China's become our middleman and it's enormously expensive. And apparently his response is these are Putin talking points, and on several occasions, people who have brought them up, simply he's actually ordered investigations of people who said these things to find out whether the people who said them have Russian connections. That's the mindset you're dealing with.
All right, we'll end it there. The Duran.locals.com. Look for us on Rockfin as well. You'll find the link down below. Duran Shop, 10%. Use the code. Good day. Take care.